Hello everyone, I am Dr. Andrew Colombo Dugavito, and I'm here to talk to you about a study that my colleagues and I completed called Adapted Physical Educators' Perspectives of Educational Research. Before we get into it, I just need to disclose that we have no conflicts of interest to disclose. Now, when considering the topic at hand, the first thing that we want to do is define educational research so we know we're all starting from the same place. And according to the American Educational Research Association, it is defined as the scientific field of study that examines education and learning processes and the human attributes, interactions, organization, and institutions that shape those educational outcomes. So in essence, any research that is conducted in or around schools about all the behaviors and interactions in the systemic organization itself would be considered educational research, and physical education falls underneath that umbrella. Now, when we think about teaching, many of you know teaching is a complex practice or an art. It takes a lot of time to become very proficient at it. Now, when we look at what challenges teachers face, they identify issues with finding effective pedagogical strategies. They find that distinguishing between efficient and inefficient teaching strategies are difficult, and they have a difficulty with determining the extent to which an activity actually promotes student learning. And this is where educational research can actually be a powerful tool, because the research that is being conducted is often looking at each of those areas that teachers have difficulty with. When we look at K-12 educators, they often report seldom using research. They express that academics and the research articles focus on theory over the actual application, the actual practice that they can use within their classroom. They find that research is often not timely enough, and it's published in places that is often very inaccessible to them. Researchers, on the other hand, often don't prioritize disseminating research or making it accessible to practitioners, places that they can find. Though educators have expressed that they would like to know about the strategies and evidence-based practices. And so we have some discourse here. We have a group, the educators, wanting to know more about how to be effective teachers, and we have researchers studying those practices, but there's no connection between. So how do we make that better? When we look at the physical education setting, and more specifically the adapted physical education setting, very little is known about the preference or actual use of research. And so that leads me to the purpose of our study. And so we sought to examine these perceptions. We were guided by 3 research questions. 1, how frequently do adapted physical educators conduct or use research, and for what purpose? Where do adapted physical educators access research? And 3, what are adapted physical educators' perceptions toward research? To do this, we modified a survey from the National Center for Research in Policy and Practice, and the revisions included grammatical alterations and sentence structures, mostly focusing from just broadly educational research to physical education research, or the physical education classroom. We used content validity, or face validity, from practitioners and AP experts in higher ed. And to recruit, we used a multi-stage sampling technique. And so we sent our survey to multiple national organizations that service physical education teachers. And then we also emailed directly former Teachers of the Year and used a snowball sampling procedure that leveraged the personal networks by having individuals provide us additional names after they completed the survey. We used descriptive statistics to report for all the demographic information and the multiple choice and open-ended questions. Chromebox Alpha was used to determine the internal consistency of all of the Likert-style questions, and we found acceptable overall reliability, as well as good internal consistency within research questions 1 and 3. We used Spearman's correlations to examine the relationship between the questions and key demographic variables. And then we used an inductive category development method to analyze the open-ended questions. So, what did we find? Well, we had 124 adapted physical educators from across the U.S. complete at least 80% of our survey, and therefore we used that data. The teaching experience ranged from 1 year to over 41 years, with a mean of around 13 and a half. We had 36 states and 1 U.S. territory, which was Guam, that was represented within the survey data. New York, Maryland, and Missouri were the most represented states. Based on our data, we found that a majority of adapted physical educators, around 61%, indicated that they had conducted research. And when we asked about why, they said to discover better ways of teaching, improve my ability to advocate for students, and because it's good for their professional development. When we looked at the individuals that did not conduct research, we found that individuals didn't conduct research because it was their job to teach and not do research, which was around 93% of those individuals. We found that they had no time, and then they also reported that they have never been asked to conduct research, or that they needed professional development, or they lacked the support to do research. Now, when we looked at the relationship of conducting research with other variables, we found that it negatively correlated with how often have you encountered research that provided a common language and set of ideas for you and your colleagues, meaning that the more likely they were to come in contact with research, the less likely they were to actually conduct research. We found that same frequency positively correlated with the question of how often have you encountered research that brought attention to an issue that you had not faced, meaning the more individuals did research, the more they found new research or new evidence that of an issue that they had not yet faced, so they found new problems. In the open-ended questions, we had 2 of them. The first one asked individuals to share an experience where they had used research to inform a decision. We had 78 responses, which is 63% of our overall sample. And those responses formed 9 categories. And they were informing best practice, professional development, leadership, advocacy, disability-specific research, assessment, behavior management, curriculum, and then we had 7 respondents who said that they didn't do research. Within our second question, we asked individuals to think about a time when a piece of research changed their thinking or opinions about possible solutions. Based on 68 responses, we found that individuals used research to, again, inform best practice for program design, advocacy, behavior management, collaboration, and personal growth. And then we even had a fair number, 24 respondents, say that research was not useful or they couldn't comment exactly to that question. When we look at access to research, predominantly, individuals are finding research in academic journals, professional journals, as well as conferences. Although you see a fair number of individuals also find or access research through social media or web-based resources. Now, when we look at perceptions toward research, we had 19 Likert-style questions that went from 1, strongly disagree, to 4, strongly agree, that we used to assess participants' perceptions toward the relevance, credibility, and value. And you'll see in our small table there, there were fair representation, either agreeing for most of the responses to the value of research. When we look at how those responses correlate with certain demographic variables, we see a few key significant results. The first is that gender did not impact any of the individual's responses, though for level of education, APE training, their frequency of conducting research, and their years of experience had some significance. Within levels of education, we see that there are positive associations with education research being too impractical or unuseful for teachers. We find a significant result with education research segregates themselves from practitioners and daily practice. And we find that a significant result with education research can be used to support any opinion, which is very in line with what we know from the existing literature. Within APE training, we find that a significant result with research that can address practical problems facing schools, and research can provide a valuable in service to educational practitioners. There's a negative relationship between frequency of research and educational research segregate themselves from practitioners, meaning that the more individuals engage with research, the less likely they are to believe that statement. And lastly, with years of experience, there's a significant result with educational research is a waste of money. So, what does this mean? One, the data suggests that many adapted physical educators use, access, and have engaged in research. This is counter to some of the research on K-12 practitioners, though it is in line with those who have used a similar survey to analyze the perceptions of school administrators and state science leaders. Within our current study, though, individuals had positive perceptions, though many stated that they believe it was not useful to their practice. Based on our findings, attending conferences and presenting and publishing in professional journals may be a good place for individuals to be able to access that research, but researchers need to find better places to disseminate that research that's more accessible. Based on our correlational analyses, we know that years of experience and higher levels of education were correlated with lower perceptions toward the validity and usefulness of research, which was a very interesting finding, and perhaps that could be attributed to individuals understanding the difficulties of the research process and having it be timely and impactful toward their practice. So in conclusion, we need to find more collaborative relationships between researchers and educators and find ways to include researchers and educators in the same spaces so they can pass information more freely. Findings need to be disseminated in places that practitioners can access freely, which can include alternative mediums such as blogs, podcasts, and social media, though we know this is not incentivized for most academic researchers. We know that teachers with high levels of education and years of experience may believe in educational research, but it doesn't address their particular needs. And so, through this study, we recognize that researchers must take a more concerted effort to provide research findings in a practical way, so teachers can better translate those findings into their own situations and into their own classrooms. And with that, there are my references. I just want to thank you for your time. There is my contact email and Twitter if you'd like to follow along, or if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. This manuscript has been recently published, and you can find it at Research Quarterly for Exercise and Sport.